Ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, my name is the Pumpkin Queen and I want to welcome you to tonight's video. Not only is it a spooky season, but this month is also Dyslexia Awareness Month. Most people who are subscribed to my channel know by now that I not only like to help people with dyslexia by narrating stories of the crypt, but have also dyslexia myself. So, to celebrate, a few narrators and myself will be telling you awesome stories tonight. Enjoy! Cornelia closed the door behind her in a hurry. Her hands moved swiftly towards the key inside of her pocket and locked it. A loud bang was heard from the other side of the door. The man had been chasing her down and now she had nowhere to go, locked inside a room without windows. She stepped away from the door and moved backwards. She yelped as he slammed a fist on the door again. "I know you're in there! Open this damn door!" he yelled. Cornelia took a deep breath. Her eyes wide open from fear as she was unsure what her next move should be. She turned around shaky and insecure. There were two more women inside of the room. When her eyes met theirs, she finally spoke up. "I can do this! Please let me go home!" Cornelia cried out. The woman on the right gave her a stern look. It seemed so icy cold that Cornelia was not sure if it was safer to be inside or outside of the room she was standing in. "This is our job, you signed up for this. Now you need to learn how to finish it," the woman on the right replied. "Signed up? You two forced me to do this. This is my life, this is my body, and you can't get to decide for me," she yelled back. The woman on the left covered her ears for a moment and gave Cornelia a shy look. "Cornelia, I didn't like it either the first time. But you learn how to cope with it. Besides, what are we going to do if our boss finds out?" Cornelia looked at her feet for a moment when that comment was dropped. She covered her face with her hands and tears began to stream down. "Do you think it will make a difference? Either that guy or our boss is going to kill us, Emma." The woman on the right gave her an angry look. "I am not going to let anyone harm us or even lay a finger on us. There are 3 of us and only 1 on the other side of that door. We can do this, but only if you take the courage and step outside." Another bang on the door was heard. It was not as powerful as the last couple of ones. Cornelia heard the man drop to his knees. She turned around and looked at the door. "Please, let me in. I need to talk to you. This is not who you are." The woman started to feel pity for the man. A part of her now indeed wanted to open the door, but not for the reason the 2 girls gave. She turned back to face the 2. Emma looked in her eyes. "Please, Cornelia, do it for us," she said as tears were falling from her face on the floor. "Don't listen to them," the man on the other side screamed. There was fear in his voice. "Take the scalpel from the bag we gave to you. There should be a small bag with powder inside of it as well. It's devil's breath, so it should keep him under for a couple of hours. We need to harvest his organs, or else our boss will take ours." Cornelia nodded in response. "Very well then, Claire, you win, but after today you won't hear from me again." Cornelia cut open the small bag and dropped some of the powder on the palm of her hand. She looked one last time at the mirror and turned to the door. Her 2 reflections vanished as she stepped closer. "This is my body," she thought, "but also our body." She took a deep breath and unlocked the door. A man with brown hair and green eyes was sitting on the floor. He looked at her, puzzled for a slight second before realizing his fate. His face changed into that can only be described as disappointed and frightened. He looked up and made an attempt to throw a punch. Cornelia blew the powder into his face. She saw him drop to the floor. "Nice work," Emma said. "Let's get to work," Claire replies.
Why I won't come to your bonfire. My friend asked me one day in October, "Hey Jesse, do you want to come to a bonfire at my house tonight?" I'd never been to a bonfire before and didn't have a ride to their house a few miles away, but he insisted that his father could give me a ride. It was a very quiet drive, and he was acting a little shifty, but I didn't think anything of it. He'd always been anxious and socially awkward. I didn't know his family well, but his father had never been much of a talker. "Is Mrs. Peterson going to be joining us? I heard she was..." What I'd started to say was that she and Mr. Peterson were separated, and she was living in her mother's house. But based on the tension in Mr. Peterson's cheekbones, I cut my question short. "No. She's still at her mother's." I was quiet the rest of the trip, not wanting to crush any more eggshells underfoot. The truck's brakes squeaked as it braked in the gravelly driveway. The house was just a few minutes away from the wilderness and deep pine forests of Oregon. Jacob led me to where the rest of the family was standing, to an enormous pile of firewood in the backyard. "Whoa, this looks like it'll be a pretty big fire, huh?" I said anxiously. "How hot would this thing burn?" "They're always smaller than you think they'll be, but it'll do the job nicely," Jacob's father grinned. He seemed in a better mood. Jacob's two older sisters began throwing gasoline onto the wood, drenching it with highly flammable fumes. My tension rose, and I stepped a few steps away from the pile. This was looking like the forest may catch fire with this enormous blaze. Jacob, his sisters, and father stood back as well, as Mr. Peterson lit a match. They all seemed strangely nervous and excited. All I could feel was the tingling sensation of fear in my stomach and fingertips. "I've been looking forward to this," Mr. Peterson said slowly. The match flew from his hand into the pile of wood. The pile erupted into an enormous fireball, a hungry, raging inferno devouring the offering of wood by these puny mortals. The heat was so intense I felt like the skin on my face was shrinking onto my skull. Jacob asked me if I could sign off a merit badge for him fire starting or something, and was very particular that I put the date and the time. "Well, Jesse, they can be pretty finicky at the office," he stuttered out. One of his sisters began throwing log after log onto the fire in a frenzy, cackling all the while, "Burn! Burn! Burn!" At the last exclamation, she tossed one of the containers of gas straight into the fire, on the end closest to me. "Nicole, no!" Mr. Peterson yelled, but it was too late. The can exploded, sending a fireball in my direction. I fell backward as I tried to run away, arms shielding my face from the greedy tendrils of flame. I got up and could see the force of the explosion had thrown several logs out of the pile. The sight that I saw in that fire then will haunt me till my dying day. I saw a face, upside down in the blaze. The woman's hair was aflame, and her eyes stared into my soul as her skin bubbled. It was Mrs. Peterson, buried underneath the wood, dead. The Petersons rose from their curled-up positions on the grass and looked toward me. They read the panic in my eyes and looked at the fire to see that horrifying sight. "No, no, no, no!" screamed Mr. Peterson. I thought he was mourning his wife until he looked up with tearful eyes toward me. "You've seen too much, kid. You were supposed to be our witness that we were nowhere near that house fire." He wasn't making sense, but he was advancing on me, determined. Jacob and his sisters slowly moved to surround me as well. "I'm sorry for what I'm going to have to do to you, kid. We can't let you leave." My eyes shifted to all the faces in turn. They were all in on it. That told me all I needed to know. I hucked the remaining gas can at my feet over my head and into the fire. The fireball sent everyone cowering, like the destructive outburst of an angry deity. I didn't flinch. I had to get out of here before they killed me, their failed alibi. I pushed Jacob over as he staggered and booked it for the forest. I had no flashlight, but I had a will to live. I could hear voices over the rushing of the wind and the rustling of the underbrush behind me. "I'm gonna kill you, you little snitch!" It was pitch black now, but they didn't have flashlights either. Suddenly, a light shone behind me. Phone flashlight. Its weak beam lit up a decent-sized river with steep banks on either side ahead of me. I ran haphazardly down the bank and into the river up to my knees. "Where is he, Dad?" I heard from a few hundred feet away, out of sight above the bank. "Crossing the river! We gotta catch him before he gets to the road!" I looked to my right and saw a corrugated metal tube of a culvert below the train track. I threw a large rock as far as I could in the direction the Petersons were running, and I heard, "Gotcha now!" from only 20 feet away. I dove into the large metal tube and lay back in the cramped space, soaking wet. It was big enough that I didn't have to crawl in, but I could lay my back against the edge and hide, the river running over me. I pulled out my phone and began to dial 911 in the darkness. Splashes erupted in the river as Mr. Peterson crossed and kept running. Thank goodness I had thrown that rock. As I tensely waited in my hiding place, I heard the rest of the family cross the river, and gunshots. 911, what is your emergency? The words dropped from my mouth like water. Peterson's, edge of town, big fire, they're chasing me and I need you to come help me. Slow down, sir. Jesse. Okay, Jesse, just give it to me nice and slow so we can send the police there. We'll also track the call to pinpoint your location while you talk. Jesse! Where did he go? Where? They were still searching for me and were still in the area. I gave the dispatch the whole story in a panicked whisper, not wanting to be found. After an agonizing half hour, I heard sirens and rustling leaves around my hiding place. Drop the gun, now! I heard an unfamiliar voice shout, Jesse, come out, it's all right. I approached the house to see the whole family in custody, the fire extinguished. The paramedics on site immediately wrapped me in a blanket, which is when I noticed my shivering. I stared into the distance and spoke to the paramedic nearest me. They wanted to burn Mrs. Peterson's mother's house. Then they were going to plant her burnt remains in the house. The older man had no idea what I was talking about, but nodded silently to keep me talking. I was supposed to be their alibi. They had me sign some merit badge paper as evidence I was here at this time. Therefore, if they were suspected, they would have evidence they were here. I collapsed in sobs into the man's shoulder, and he seemed startled, but held me close as I processed it all, eyes squeezed closed. After several long minutes, I looked up to see the Petersons being pushed into police cars. Their eyes told me that I would pay someday, and then they were driven away. After the trial, I never saw the Peterson family again. My parents relocated to a different state for safety, or at least peace of mind. I now live on my own, far away from that bonfire, from those woods, and from that family. I still look over my shoulder for familiar faces who wish me harm, though. I would tell you where I live, but you never know who may be listening. Better safe than sorry. Good night. Sleep well. I can't say I'll be sleeping tonight.
This one time, I went to a house party. Ended up meeting a girl there and we hit it off. She was a little odd, but I liked her style. Anyways, we started hanging out regularly. At first, everything seemed fine. Then she began to get more and more distant. I thought maybe she was losing interest. Wasn't happy with it, but it happens. Until one day I started getting weird phone calls from her number. When I would pick up, there was a long silence. Then it sounded like crying in the distance. This went on for a while. I began to ignore them, but then they went to voicemail. It would be 2 minutes of her crying. Eventually, the crying became a sobbing laugh, which was even creepier. Finally, I thought about it and decided that maybe she was in some kind of danger, so I called her. When she answered, she sounded completely sketched out. She talked really fast and barely made any sense. Maybe I watched too many movies, but the first thing that came to my mind was that she was being held hostage or something and couldn't talk freely. Went to her house after work to check up on her. It was nighttime and all the lights in her place were off. I would have thought that she wasn't home, but her car was in the driveway and her door was opened a crack. Went up to the door and knocked. There was no answer, so I called out her name. Footsteps could be heard shuffling around upstairs, and I decided to go in to check it out. I found the light switch at the entrance on the wall and flicked the lights on. Once I could see, it was obvious something was wrong. The place looked like a mess, and on the walls there were weird things written in Sharpie markers. The words, "They're watching," was written over and over again, along with strange patterns and designs I had never seen before. Grotesque figures of people were drawn everywhere as well. They were disproportionate, and all of them had a single eye. Some of the eyes were on the forehead, but some were on their hands or stomach. It made no sense. I then went upstairs to check on the sound I had heard earlier. The light in the hallway didn't turn on when I used the switch. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked down the hall. There was broken glass everywhere. Bloody footprints led to the last room on the right. I called out her name again. All I got in response was more sounds of whimpering. By this time, even though slightly confused, I didn't think there was any danger. It didn't seem like there was anyone in the house besides her, but maybe she had been hurt and left or something. I followed the bloody prints down the hall, then entered the room. The smell was overwhelming. It smelled just like an open sewer. My light scanned the room slowly. In the corner, I saw her huddled. She looked terrible. Her hair was matted and clumped. Some of it had been pulled out. She sat there, hunched over, picking at her arm, which caused long trails of blood to flow to the floor. Shit and urine was all over the place, along with syringes littered everywhere. As I approached her, she started mumbling that I was one of them. As reassuring as I could be, I tried to comfort her. When I reached out to touch her, she hissed and scratched at me, then jumped up and clawed at my face. Her fingernails felt like fire as they raked down under my eyes. I tried to push her off, but she was freakishly strong. She toppled me over, and we rolled around in the shit and piss until she ended up on top of me. Her hands went around my neck as she tightened them. She was choking the life out of me. One of my hands frantically searched for anything I could use to defend myself as the other tried to push her away. Finally, I found one of the needles and stabbed her in the arm with it. This caused her to jump off from me and retreat back to her corner, where she began to cry again. I wasted no time in running from the house to call the police. They came and got her and put her into drug rehab. I didn't press any charges because I just felt sorry for her. They said she had gotten into some kind of drug-induced psychosis or something, and she didn't know what she was doing. To think that I had dated a druggie for over a month without cluing into the fact baffles me. I mean, really, until that night where she almost killed me, she seemed mostly normal. I hope she gets good treatment for all this and can live a good life without me.
This story I'm about to tell you is my personal ghost story. The house I lived in when I grew up was built by my parents in the early 2000s. Obviously, no one had died in the house, and it wasn't built on an ancient Indian burial ground, thus making this story that I'm about to tell you be all that more paranormal. When the activity first started, it seemed to have come from the basement. The basement at the time was unfinished, and like most unfinished basements, it was kind of spooky to begin with. The basement is where we kept our food storage, as well as where the fuse box was located. My brother and I were 8 and 6 at the time, and we would avoid the basement at all costs. For some reason, my brother and I seemed to pick up on some energy coming from the basement. Whenever we did have to unfortunately go down into the basement, we made sure that we always closed the basement door when we left the basement. We wouldn't just close the door, we would also lock it as well, just in case. At this time in my family's life, my father had to travel for business, and was often gone weeks at a time. For some reason, we would notice activity coming from the basement when he was gone. We would hear shuffling coming from the stairs in the basement, as well as the door handle slowly rattling in the night. It was as if the spirits were afraid of my father and only came out when he left. This had been going on for some time, but this was not what I consider the start of the paranormal activity. The paranormal activity started when one night I accidentally forgot to lock the basement door. The way that our rooms were situated is that we were at the top of the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, however, immediately to your left was the basement door. I remember the night that I would hear rattling coming from the basement door, to my horror remembering that I forgot to lock it, when all of a sudden the sound of the basement door slowly creaked open. Whatever it was that was haunting my basement was no longer confined and was able to haunt the whole house. Things immediately got worse. We were starting to get so spooked that my parents installed a security system on all the doors and windows in our house. Initially, this was a great idea and gave us a great peace of mind, but little did we know this would only add to our horror. My brother, my mother, and I would often wake up in the middle of the night with the alarms blaring because the front door to our home was wide open. We would often write off these experiences as not locking the door completely and that a strong gust of wind knocked open the door. We would just make a strong mental note to be sure to lock all the doors and windows. But still, the activity persisted. Near this time in our family's life, my parents decided to add 2 more sisters to our family. The activity seemed to die down a bit, or we were just too busy to notice, but everything was going pretty well for the first couple of months. Things were going so well that my parents were comfortable enough to cancel our security system, because we finally felt comfortable in our own home. Many more developments were made with my family. My parents decided to finish the basement, and we actually decided to get a dog. Years had passed since the last paranormal event, and my father was now working from home. My brother and I practically forgot of all the paranormal activity in our home, and we decided to move our rooms into the finished basement. This would later prove to be a huge mistake. The way our basement worked was like one of those half basements, where half of it was underground and the other half was able to be accessed from the outside. To be able to access our basement door, you'd have to come from our backyard. Now, my backyard growing up was terrifying. It was literally miles of woods. My brother and I once tried to hike all the way through our backyard to find the nearest town, but we were never able to do it. It was just so many trees. I remember once I was working on a tree house that was in my backyard, and I had to immediately stop because I was hearing chanting coming from deep in the woods. That next week, my father came home with a grocery bag full of new DVDs that we were going to watch. In that bag of DVDs was the movie Paranormal Activity. While watching this movie, one of my sisters, who was now 5 at the time, asked my father, "Daddy, are there such things as ghosts?" Before my father could answer, there came a loud boom coming from the basement. It was so loud it shook the entire house. Everybody looked at one another with wide eyes and with mouths agaped. Not did everyone hear that sound, but also everyone felt it. My mother, who does not believe in the paranormal, was the only one that was not completely paralyzed with fear. She promptly grabbed the largest kitchen knife that we owned and headed to the basement. None of us were able to even say a word, let alone move, because we were so terrified. Finally, my mother emerged from the basement, laughing at herself, as well as all of us, saying that, "How could you guys believe that that was actually a ghost? It was just a box that fell." We tried to laugh it off as best we could, but we were still a little shell-shocked from the experience. My brother and I looked at each other with wide eyes, now realizing that both of our rooms were in the very place we heard this loud bang come from. In my opinion, this movie was able to invite whatever spirits were nearby into our home again. The activity picked up and was more worse than it ever was when I was little. When we would come home from school, the doors to our home would often be wide open, with my dog losing its mind inside barking. One of the more terrifying experiences I have experienced in that house was coming home to find my dog barking upstairs. I went upstairs to see what my dog was barking at when I came across the attic door that had been pulled down from the ceiling that was wide open. I was about 16 at the time, and I had a baseball bat in my hand. I was about to go up the attic stairs to investigate when I immediately had the strongest feeling of dread come across my body. My mind was immediately telling me whatever was hiding up in the darkness of my attic wanted to hurt me very badly. I just decided to close the attic stairs, and to this day I still agree with that decision. Something new that my family was now experiencing with the activity was what we call peeking. Instead of just having doors be opened or hearing shuffling coming from the basement, we would now catch glimpses of what appeared to be a spirit poking its head around corners and doorways. We would often write it off as just tricks of the mind or our eyes playing tricks on us, until we started to realize that the more this happened, the more defined the spirit appeared to be. It even got to the point to where we could actually see red eyes peering back at us. At this point, we decided to call a church member to come over and bless our home. When this happened, most of the activity went away, but that's when my dreams started to become a lot more vivid and a lot more violent. In my dreams, I would often see 3 figures that were covered in shadow coming from the backyard and into my house. 2 of the figures felt kind of indifferent about me and didn't really seem harmful at all. The third one, however, all I could feel was pure hate and evil coming from it. This figure seemed especially drawn towards me. This figure emitted such strong emotions, I often debated if it was actually a spirit at all, or perhaps something more terrifying. As the dream slowly persisted to getting worse, I would often wake up to find a figure standing in my doorway. I remember the most terrifying experience of my life was once waking up during sleep paralysis. In my dream, I saw the 3 figures standing over me near my bed. The one evil figure had something coming out of its mouth and completely covering my face. At first, I thought it was trying to eat me or something, but then I realized what it was doing. It wasn't taking anything from me. It was giving me something. It was giving me thoughts. It was giving me feelings that weren't mine. During this sleep paralysis, one of the figures leaned over to the other 2 and said, "I think this one can see us." I immediately awoken from my dream to find that my bed was shaking. These kind of events continued until I graduated high school and moved on to college. I still have some side effects from the experience. I have had roommates tell me that I often shake and scream in the night. 2 things that makes this experience the most terrifying for me is 1, if no one died on our property, where did the spirits come from? Did they come from maybe the woods? Is that where I heard the chanting from? The second point I'd like to make was that the activity never actually stopped. My family just happened to move away. I just hope that whoever now lives in that house does not have to experience whatever it was that I had to.
I was talking on the phone to a female friend. We were thinking of a beer app we wanted to develop back then, and decided to meet up for a beer and discuss our business plan. We met in a major building downtown and began looking for a bar to sit down. This building is very interesting. It has dozens of units per floor and 2 ground floors filled with shops, bars, and restaurants. And throughout the years, it has been the home for prostitutes, drug dealers, artists, university students, and people who are starting over with their lives. Nowadays, it's mostly artists and students, so it has gained new life. We decided on a bar that was outside next to one of the smaller streets that connected the new and shiny CBD to old downtown. No alleys or anywhere to run here, as all buildings used to be built right next to each other. We're drinking our beer from an improvised jar. I think it was a blender cup, and talking about our app when two guys approached the table. It's very common for homeless people, street vendors, and artists to approach the tables in Brazil because they're usually outside, and most places won't burden the bartenders with the job of shooing them away. Downtown is especially annoying in this regard because there are just so many of them. You get used to it though, so I didn't think too much of these guys. One of them was really tall, maybe 6 feet. That's tall for us Brazilians, you guys. Wearing a beat-up tuxedo with an old-timey hat. The other was my height, 5'8". Brazilian stereotype radar instantly pointed to homeless, wants money for drugs, probably high, be short. So he started telling me one of the usual sob stories, usually the bus money to return to their hometown, or that they don't want money but food, or just some sense so he can buy a Coke can, etc. But I honestly wasn't really feeling patient that day, and my friend and I were talking in English, so I didn't want to get interrupted and mix up the languages. I'm sure you can understand it can be a bit hard to switch mid-conversation, so I briskly said, "No thanks," without looking at the guy. The guy sat down, which startled us, and said, "Hey, you should be more polite to people on the streets. You never know who they might be. I didn't ask you to give me anything. I just wanted you to hear me out." I looked at him and apologized. It's common for people to beg. It's not common for them to sit down less than a foot away from you and start pointing their finger in your face. "You were just so rude. You barely even looked at me," he said. Then he threw his fist on the table really hard, and people around us started looking. "You people are just so heartless. We're invisible. Someone should teach you a lesson. Look at that shirt of yours. You must be some playboy from the CBD region. Fucking assholes. Why do you even come to drink here? You should be somewhere where the waiter wipes your ass after you're done shitting your pants." And he kept talking and talking and talking. I used his pauses to say sorry, and I didn't mean to be rude, but he was unstoppable at this point. I felt like a punch was coming. The skinny guy kept egging him on and getting closer. Finally, two waiters came over and told them to fuck off, that they couldn't bother the customers and that they were being intrusive. The skinny guy backed off with his hands up, but the tux guy just got up, still looking at me, like he wouldn't give up that easily. They were shunned away by one of the waiters. I thanked the other one for helping us out, and we had a couple more sips of beer. The other waiter returned and said he was worried the two guys might come back, and that we should probably think about closing the tab and leaving. I agreed. He went inside to get the check and we followed him. When we paid, I asked for an Uber. My friend asked the waiter if we could wait outside with him. We start walking out, and as soon as we're on the sidewalk, we look to the left, and sure enough, the two dicks are there. Tux guy had a fucking metal bar in his hand, and the skinny one had one of his hands on his back. I freaked the fuck out and ushered my friend quickly to the Uber. We got inside, locked the door, and told the driver that the homeless guys were after us and to pull off. Tux guy proceeded to get at the window next to my friend and punch it really hard. I thought he was going to break it. He kept screaming and we couldn't even understand him anymore. At that moment, the Uber driver, my hero, walked out of the car and began yelling as hard as he could that it was his car and that he'd fuck him up so bad if they broke anything. He began pushing the tux guy, ignoring the metal bar, and telling them to fuck the fuck off or he'd run him over if he got the chance. Tux guy put his arms down and said he didn't know it was his car and that we were two assholes he needed to teach a lesson to. Bear in mind, my poor friend didn't do anything to him. The driver checked the window, got in the car, and we drove off. I apologized for what happened and he said it was okay. It wasn't our fault. We got to my neighborhood and everything was fine after that. Tuxedo guy, let's never meet again.